Hello, this is Christian Her, and welcome to the course. In this video, we'll be looking at the loop structures in PHP in general. So the objectives are, we're going to look at the characteristics of a loop structure. This is applied to virtually almost any language. And then we'll take a look at a few loop structure flow charts. Then we'll compare a pre-test or top control loop against a post-test or a bottom control loop. And we'll look at some loop structures in PHP. A loop structure is really just a block of statements or a series of statements that gets executed a number of times until a certain condition is reached. And a loop is usually consisted of a Boolean expression, you need that, and a loop body. Okay, and then one cycle or one execution of the entire loop body is referred to as an iteration. You will hear this term many times in the lecture as well as in other languages. So a loop can run definitely. This means that you have a specific number of times that the loop will run. It can be run indefinitely. This is with an unknown specific number of times. This is usually occurs when you are dealing with an event-based type of situation. And then you have this infinitely, something you don't want to do. An infinite loop is sometimes called a never-ending loop or a forever loop or endless loop, whatever you call it. Okay, so prevent that from happening unless you intentionally want to do that. And then finally, there's also nested loops. This is just basically, it's not a loop, but it's just that you can nest one loop inside another. So let's take a look at the loop structure of flowcharts here. So the first one you see here is a typical flowchart for a loop. This can be applied to a for loop or a while loop. As you can see, you have a diamond shape, which is a conditional shape. And then, from the conditional shape, we'll test it to see if the condition is true or false. If it's true, then the loop of the body will get executed, will run until the end of the body is reached, and then it will go back to the beginning of that condition or into that condition shape again, and we will retest that condition to see if it's true or false. And that gets repeated until the condition is no longer true, then it exits out of that loop. And the second one here is very similar, except now we kind of like swap the two shapes here. So the loop body is at the top and the condition is the bottom. This is also called as the bottom control loop. We'll talk about that later. And the third one here is what's called a nested loop, just an example of that. So you have a outer loop and the inner loop. So the outer loop is the orange loop. You test that condition there if it's true or not. If it's true, then you go into the inner loop, and that inner loop should be completely nested inside the outer loop. And it will test that inner loop until if it's false. And once it's false, then it will exit back and then go back to the outer loop, and that will be tested until that is false, and then you exit out of that loop. So that's very useful for looping through an array or a list of items. Here is it again, the flowchart for a pre-test or a top control loop. This is when you have a Boolean expression, which is that condition. You test it at the top of the loop structure. And if the condition is initially false, so it's possible that condition may be false from the get-go. And if that's the case, then the body of the loop never gets executed. As a result, we see the iteration is not guaranteed. The next one here is the post-test or the bottom control loop. This is very similar. You would still have a condition to test, but you test it at the bottom of the loop. So before the condition is being tested, you already execute the body of the loop, right? So at least once. So therefore we say that it guarantees one iteration. So this is an example of a do while loop. So the loop structures in the PHP, there are about 4 of them. The first one we'll be looking at is the while loop. This is a top control loop. Another one is the do while loop. This is the only bottom control loop that we know of. And we have the for loop. This is also a top control loop. It is probably the most complex loops of them all. And later on, when we talk about arrays, we'll be looking at the for each loop. This is a top control loop also, but it's only used for arrays and objects. So these are the loop structures in PHP, and the next couple of videos will be looking into each of these loops and see how they work inside PHP.